Since March 13, 2021, Forest Nova Scotia has been running a well-financed, multi-front campaign of disinformation with a single purpose: to stop the passage of the Biodiversity Act. Though the campaign has been very well financed, and some persons with experience in advertising and advertising agencies have informed me they estimate a budget of as much as $250,000, with ads appearing on social media, in newspapers, and on the radio throughout the province. Exactly who these backers are remains unknown. What is known is that Forest Nova Scotia has begun a campaign of disinformation through a proxy organization they invented called the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition, designed specifically to incite fear. Targeting in particular scientists and ecology organizations, conservationists, small local business owners, and private individual foresters who practice and promote more progressive, less environmentally damaging forestry. Forest Nova Scotia has demonstrated there is no load to which they will not stoop to stop the passage of the Biodiversity Act, tantamount to the creation of a law requiring and regulating environmentally responsible forestry. And given the fear tactics and disinformation, I think at this time it is only appropriate to question, is Forest Nova Scotia still only a forestry lobbying group? Or have they stooped too far into tactics of terror? If asked, the average person would define terrorism as acts of violence or destruction designed to incite terror among the general populace with the goal of attaining some sort of military or political end. However, in 2006, the United States expanded the definition of terrorism to include any act that either damages or causes the loss of any real or personal property or places a person in reasonable fear of injury. This was first done through the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which was intended to stop animal rights activists from covertly entering places such as research labs and factory farms to reveal the horrific conditions the animals were enduring. However, this act was a double-edged sword, as it implies that activism acts that cause loss or realistic risk of harm to entities or individuals can qualify as acts of terrorism. Canada, of course, is not the United States, but the recognition of the use of information or disinformation intentionally to cause fear or terror is there, at the heart of the precedent of international law. And since mid-March of 2021, when Forest Nova Scotia began its campaign of disinformation to cause the general public to fear the Biodiversity Act, an act specifically intended to put limits upon and regulate punishments for damage to the endangered Acadian ecosystem, especially in regions where there are endangered species, Forest Nova Scotia, through its proxy organization, the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition, has not only disseminated massive amounts of disinformation, including both poor science and stories to make private land and forest owners feel threatened by the Biodiversity Act, but they have also specifically targeted both conservation organizations, small businesses, and individuals, anyone who speaks out in support of the Biodiversity Act. They have used language specifically designed to negatively frame these organizations, businesses, and individuals by labeling them as activists, as if that were some terrible thing, though it is a word which denotes a person so concerned about well-being that the person becomes active in preservation and protection. This word, activist, they have actively and aggressively sought to reframe as a profoundly negative and hostile term. And the reality of this is revealed in the statements they themselves have posted both on their Facebook group and on their website. But first, let's recap the history. How did we get to a place where we have to carefully examine the ethics and the activities of a forestry lobbying group? Well, there was clearly a period of intense planning before the public ever became aware of Forest Nova Scotia's activities. Their doings first came to the public eye on March 13, 2021, when this ad appeared in the Chronicle Herald, Nova Scotia's and Halifax's largest newspaper. The ad claimed to be from an organization called the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition, expressing grave concern about the potential implementation of Bill 4, the Biodiversity Act. The cause of this grave concern was that Bill 4 legislated protection of Nova Scotia's many endangered species and its threatened ecosystems. However, on March 17, 2021, Jeff Bishop, the executive director of Forest Nova Scotia, appeared on the CBC radio program Information Morning, where the interviewer, Preston, pressed Jeff Bishop for the truth regarding the origin of this mysterious Concerned Private Landowner Coalition. Let's hear what Jeff had to say.
Okay, but does this group even exist, the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition? It's not a formal organization. No, you're right, Preston. We didn't feel that we had to go that far, if you will.
That full-page, full-color ad that appeared in the Chronicle Herald, all by itself, cost over $7,000. It's been nearly a month since that initial ad appeared, and similar ads have appeared in regional papers all around the province. While at the same time, a non-stop advertisement blitz has been pushed around the province through radio advertisements, through, insofar as I have been able to determine, every significant regional radio station in the province. And there has also been an ongoing online campaign of Forest Nova Scotia sponsored advertisements against Bill 4 as well, also in the name of this so-called Concerned Private Landowner Coalition. In Preston's interview on Info Morning on March 17, 2021, Preston asked Jeff Bishop to explain why Forest Nova Scotia felt it had to invent the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition to run its advertisements, to serve as a front. Why did Forest Nova Scotia simply not present its concerns under its own name? Here is Preston of Information Morning with CBC Radio, and a very good question, followed by Bishop's answer.
The only name that appears on the ad is the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition. Now, you're with a group called Forest Nova Scotia, and that doesn't appear in the ad, even though your organization paid for the ad. Why didn't you use your name, the Forest Nova Scotia, in the ad?
And so, as we were having those and wanted to speak up more publicly, one of the issues that we have continuously been fighting is people keep making an assumption that this is a forestry-only issue because it's under the Department of Lands and Forestry. And it's a big issue because this is going to affect farmers. It's going to affect people who own land for recreation purposes, for conservation purposes, whatever you own private land for. This act is going to have an impact on it. So we've been reaching out to groups and companies that aren't part of our organization. So we felt it was more accurate of the folks that we've been speaking to.
And so Bishop's story is that Forest Nova Scotia, driven by pure and altruistic concern for the average Nova Scotian landowner, invested an enormous amount of money in a massive ad campaign and created a fictitious group for political lobbying. I'm not even sure of the legality of that action. All to prevent Nova Scotians from suffering a biodiversity act designed to protect its ecosystems and endangered species. And here we are, almost a month since the fictitious Concerned Private Landowner Coalition's first ad appeared, and I'll reiterate, fully funded by Forest Nova Scotia, and the campaign of disinformation carries on. There is big corporate money deeply invested in preventing the passage of the Biodiversity Act in Nova Scotia. Now at this point you might be thinking that's all well and good, Cliff, but what does this have to do with Forest Nova Scotia promoting fear? That is an ominous interpretation of their behavior. Well, to understand this, we have to go back and look at Forest Nova Scotia's message through their proxy, the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition. I'm fairly sure that Forest Nova Scotia consulted with some type of firm or agent specializing in rhetoric, because they are building on classic tactics, the big three used by communist governments, dictatorial potentates, cult leaders, and religious zealots throughout the centuries. Incite terror, incite division, and disinform. It's a simple formula, yet it's been successfully used for many centuries. So let's look at these 3 points. How is Forest Nova Scotia disinforming the public? There are far too many examples to go into them all. We'll just look at a few key ones. This is one of their original posts, claiming that the Concerned Private Landowners Coalition was recently formed to defend the rights of Nova Scotian landowners. And directly beneath that it states, and I quote, Bill 4 isn't about the environment, it's about who gets to control private land. This is quite simply fear-mongering. It literally states on the first page of the Biodiversity Act, in Statement 2, the purpose of this act is to provide for the stewardship, conservation, sustainable use, and governance of biodiversity in the province as part of an integrated framework of legislation. The mission of the Biodiversity Act is defined from the outset, but the literal, written, legal statement did not mean all that much to Forest Nova Scotia. I ask you, why do you think that is? But wait, there's more. Right from the outset, their Facebook page presented a number of scenes varying from forestry work to farming work to people out skidooing and riding ATVs, one portraying a parent and child biking and another person hiking, and each making the assertion, quite literally, stop Bill 4 before it stops you from doing these things. These images were carefully chosen. The simple statement, "Stop Bill 4 before it stops you," was also carefully chosen. The images portray ordinary people doing grassroots things, and the message is meant to convey fear. Bill 4, for some vague reason, is meant to control you. I could go on, but I won't waste your time with it. Their website, Facebook group, and chat are riddled with this kind of nonsense. So how is Forest Nova Scotia aiming to create division? From the outset of their advertising campaign, Forest Nova Scotia, through their proxy, the Concerned Private Landowner Coalition, has waged a war of words declaring that Halifax activists are out to control the land of rural private landowners. At the time of the creation of this video, there were over 80 posts on their Facebook group. 7 of them specifically identify Halifax activists, complaining that Dalhousie University professors have joined those Halifax activists, that Halifax activists seem to think they can take better care of private land than the thousands of private landowners in Nova Scotia. In all caps, that Bill 4 is being promoted by Halifax activists who want to control what rural property owners do on their land, that the director of the Ecology Action Centre is the king of Halifax activists, that Mike Lancaster, a lifelong ecological forester, is a Halifax activist despite that he lives 25 miles outside Halifax. But the attempt to divide doesn't just stop there. All activists are bad, according to Forest Nova Scotia, which on their Facebook group specifically identifies activists as a problem and frames them in the negative 15 times. 15 posts out of a bit over 80 at the time of the making of this video. In a nutshell, Forest Nova Scotia is aiming to define Halifax and urban dwellers as the problem, to divide Nova Scotians against Nova Scotians. They're aiming for the argument those rotten Halifaxian activists want to tell decent, hard-working rural dwellers what they can and cannot do with their land. Of course, they do have to confront the problem that there are activists and conservationists all around the province, myself included. I don't live anywhere near an urban area. So they need to lump in everybody who's concerned about the state of ecosystem health and biodiversity in Nova Scotia as one of those problematic activists. But if that were not bad enough, they have more than once targeted specific individuals as well as small businesses in Nova Scotia. Here, they note each of the small businesses owned by Gregor Wilson, or at least in which he has some share or interest in. And I believe that there is an implied effort, given that they went so far as to even hyperlink them, to have Gregor Wilson targeted for cyberbullying, or perhaps to have his businesses shunned, all because he made the mistake of being an activist, working against the interest of Forest Nova Scotia and its big money backers. This is just one of various illustrations of apathy and cyberbullying. These screenshots were taken from a group of their supporters discussing the hunger strike of Jacob Fillmore in his attempt to get Chuck Porter to meet with him regarding his concerns about the rampant clearcutting of Nova Scotia's vital mainland moose habitat. It's hard to say which is more appalling, these persons' gratuitous disregard for human life, or the fact that they think that they are knowledgeable about forest ecology, all the while declaring that it is beneficial to cut old-growth forests in the bizarre belief that new-growth forest does more for the ecosystem. But these are the kinds of persons that Forest Nova Scotia has managed to gain as allies in its efforts to stop Bill 4. Hateful individuals mocking an earnest young man on a hunger strike. Conspiracy theorists denying climate change and tooting Agenda 21. Certain mayors writing on behalf of their towns as if the entire town supported stopping Bill 4, despite the concerns of some of their councillors and the fact that many of their town's residents support the Biodiversity Act. Fear has been the general theme of all of their communications, whether online, through newspaper ads, or through radio ads, from the beginning of their ad war. Right from their very first ad that they ran on March 13th, we find it, calling all private landowners, huge capital letters. New legislation will give the governments of Nova Scotia broad and unprecedented authority over your land. Fines up to $1 million. Agriculture, Christmas tree growing, housing and road construction, forest management, farming livestock, and development are all activities that will be impacted. Massive assumptions and no meat to the argument. But when you're running a disinformation campaign, you don't need meat for your argument. You just take a dose of ignorance and stir it up with some fear. In this case, imply that a bunch of evil urban activists and those darn inconvenient scientists over at Dalhousie University have no idea nothing what they're talking about. And it's all just a big plot to get control of the woods and land of the private landowner. Disinformation and division, along with an ill-defined boogeyman, are the historic recipe for stirring up ignorance and fear. In addition to attempts to stir up fear, Forest Nova Scotia has certainly been making light with some facts, in particular numbers. On their website, they have been fond of boasting that up to 90% of persons who have contacted MLAs have objected to the Biodiversity Act. I'm curious to know how on earth they would even get access to those letters. Do they mean to imply that the provincial government forwarded all the letters they received from concerned Nova Scotians about the Biodiversity Act to Forest Nova Scotia? Let's be frank, that either implies criminal behavior on the part of the government, or Forest Nova Scotia is playing fast and loose with some stats. They've also said, not implied, outright said, that they have thousands of supporters. Yet, after a vastly expensive advertising campaign that has likely cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, Forest Nova Scotia has managed to convince a grand total of 531 people to like their Facebook page and 119 people to like their Stop Bill 4 website. And those numbers put together are a far cry from thousands of supporters. Meanwhile, this just in, crowds gather across Nova Scotia, not just in Halifax as Forest Nova Scotia would like to claim, across Nova Scotia, in support of a Biodiversity Act, in support of saving our province's endangered ecosystems and wildlife, in support of keeping our forests Acadian and not transforming them into the endless green, monocrop, biodiversity suppressing forest fire hazards that are tree farms. The people are speaking, and despite Forest Nova Scotia's campaign of disinformation and fear, the intelligent people of Nova Scotia, the majority of Nova Scotia, are not buying their lies. So yes, my conclusion is that Forest Nova Scotia has most definitely been deeply engaged in an intentional campaign of fear-mongering. Forest Nova Scotia is not a charity. They aren't throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars into a massive ad campaign to stop Bill 4 because they're all that concerned whether John Doe gets to ride his ATV, or Jane Doe gets to go biking with her child, or Jack Doe gets to go fly fishing out on a stream, or Margaret and Carl Doe get to pick grapes and blueberries on their farm. Forest Nova Scotia has an agenda. The question you should be asking yourself is, are you going to buy it? And their agenda is, well, it's revealed pretty clearly in the satellite imagery portrayed through the photogrammetry of the Microsoft Flight Simulator. Unhindered, unfettered, clear cuts everywhere. Thank you for watching. The Naturalist program is committed to the reliable coverage of all matter of topics relating to natural science, from ecology and conservation to the nature of the universe beyond our Earth, and making that information practical with solid advice on living well with the natural world. If you appreciate the program, please take a moment to subscribe. Subscribing costs nothing and never will, but it sure helps a lot.